To the June 17th regular meeting of Council, I recognize firstly that we are in the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question relating to an agenda item only, would you please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet, and at the start of question period I will call forward those who've signed up to address Council at the podium. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, Ms. Goury, and I understand we have a mittful.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For agenda item 10E, 350 Terminal Avenue, we're adding a delegation from Sergio Pawar. For agenda item 10F, we're adding the actual attachment for the delegation from Scott Butler, President of High Street Ventures, as well as Bill Fraser, Architect. So those are two separate delegations that are following item 10F, as well as Ed Javier, Natalie Watt, and Malcolm Threadgill. So those are the delegations that have been added to item 10F. And we have also added 11D, the bylaw status sheet, just for information. And that's it, Your Worship.
A motion for the approval of the agenda is amended. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Adoption of minutes. We have no minutes to adopt this time. Mayor's report, a few things I want to address generally. As is obvious to everyone in the community, we are now in extremely dry conditions, which call for some important reminders. Most brush fires that occur within the city are the result of human carelessness in the form of poorly discarded cigarettes, either thrown from a car window or not properly extinguished in an ashtray. And so I'm asking the community to respect the incredible damage and mayhem that flows from a fire that is caused by simple human error. So please, keep in mind, smoking, campfires, and barbecues are not permitted in city parks. Propane barbecues set on low flame are permitted within the approved locations of picnic shelters in Bowen and Sutton Maffeo, where a use permit is required. Anyone who wishes to have further details can contact the Nanaimo Parks and Recreation at 250-756-5200. Likewise, we encourage our use of our parks and trails system, but do so cautiously. To report a fire in the city of Nanaimo on a park or trail, please call 911. And to report a wildfire, would you please call 1-800-663-555 or just star 555 on most cellular networks. Likewise, as you're using your barbecues, would you please be cautious, be aware of your clearances near combustibles. And our final reminder again, never dispose of a cigarette butt anywhere but in an ashtray or proper receptacle. In addition, everyone is invited to Fire Station number 4 at 1425 Cranberry Avenue on Wednesday, June 19th from 3 to 7 p.m. Chief Fry is here, looking to be your happy host. There will be opportunities for kids and adults to learn about bystander CPR, fire extinguishers, fire safety, emergency preparedness, tips on fire smarting your property, and more. Tour an engine and go in the Fire Safety House, and support the Nanaimo Professional Firefighters Charitable Society by participating in their fundraising barbecue. This is our first open house, and our plan is for future ones annually. Chief Fry announces and says that as this is a working fire station, we will keep the road blocked off for fire department vehicles only. Parking may be found at lots nearby. We've also started stage 2 watering restrictions as of June 14th. The city water supply at Jump Lake is at its normal level for this time of year. It's anticipated there will be sufficient water for summer use. However, the city is encouraging residents and businesses to practice water conservation. And finally, I want to make reference to Canada Day. Don't forget to come down, wear red and white to celebrate Canada Day at Sutton Maffeo Park. Festivities will take place from 11 a.m. until 3:30 p.m. on Monday, July the 1st. It's our nation's 152nd birthday, and I can say with a certain amount of pride and patriotism, as we look around the world, we have much to be grateful for living in this wonderful country, and I hope that citizens will come down and share in the celebration along with everyone else. That is my report. We have no presentations tonight, Ms. Goury, and we have no delegations per se, apart from those speaking to the various agenda items. I would ask for a motion for the next item, adoption of the consent items. Moved Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. With respect to reports, we have committee recommendations from the Governance and Priorities Committee. And I just want to announce that the way our system works in Nanaimo with our new Governance and Priorities Committee, the acting mayor, who for 6 weeks is Councillor Hemmons, chairs that committee. So I'm happy to turn it over to Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I would like to move the committee recommendations as printed, both 1 and 2.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is our strategic plan. Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not a great long introduction to the strategic plan initiative, but the strategic plan is a project that Council's been working on since February through a number of workshops at our Governance and Priorities Committee, and it's worked its way down to a very focused document with attached implementation plan and action statements. So there's 4 pillars or themes that are the focus of this particular document. As you know, governance has been a priority since the get-go with the new council, and the economic health, livability, and environment, of course, was the 4th. And under each of those are action plans, and each of those action plans will be further built out in the business plans for the council consideration as we move into the fall budget cycle. So it's gone through a number of workshops with council. I think council's arrived at a place where it's prepared or in a position to consider adoption, and be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Recommended motion?
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Brown. Any discussion? I would just remind everyone before we do vote on this that for those who are watching at home and listening, all of these items and everything is available on the city website, and we encourage everyone to take advantage of the opportunity to know what's happening in their city by using the website and or watching Shaw Cable and see us in action. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action number 57. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The report, as you mentioned, is regarding a response to Truth and Reconciliation called action item number 57, which is outlined in the report, is very specific towards the education of employees including in local governments, such as Nanaimo. So I'm going to turn it over briefly here to Ms. Bhopal Singh, who's drafted the report. I was able to give you a brief presentation on the report and answer any questions that Council may have.
Ms. Bhopal Singh.
The report you have before you is in response to a motion from Council to look at an implementation plan for Truth and Reconciliation Commission Action number 57. This is one that speaks to the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, including one specifically requesting that local governments in particular, as well as other levels of government, educate their staff on the history of Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples, including the history of residential schools, and that through this, staff will be educated on intercultural competency, anti-racism, and so forth. So the report you have before you lays out a pathway for the city to undertake this work, and it's seen as a foundational step in reconciliation for the city to do its own internal work. And this fits well with the work that Council have been doing with Snuneymuxw. You'll notice that the report also speaks to Snout-Now-us, whose traditional territory overlaps Snuneymuxw to the north, and also speaks to working with our urban Indigenous groups and community members, and to set that up as a framework. So the initial report talks about using internal resources for 2019, and then working collaboratively with Snuneymuxw, Snout-Now-us, and our urban Indigenous community members to come up with an approach for staff, and also include the union and staff in that approach and frame that out, and also our human resources, of course. So I'm not sure if you've got any questions, but that's a quick overview.
Councillor Bonner. Councillor Martman first, sorry.
Thank you. I was going to move the recommendation, and I also feel it's important enough that I want to read the whole recommendation out. That council support the proposed intercultural competency implementation plan to support City of Nanaimo staff learning about local, provincial, and national histories of Indigenous peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Let me just say that I think, as mayor, that this is a very important step. This council has made it a priority to restore its relationship with Sinixt First Nation and Sanazaz at Nanoose, and ensuring that the staff who work for City Hall have the kind of competency that is talked about in this motion. It is not just that we need the support of Sinixt in terms of developing the city in a way that will be good for all of us. We want their support, and this motion speaks to that. Any further discussion? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is much more than what I thought was going to come. I want to thank staff for doing this. And the reason I'm so emotional is because when I'm on travel journeys, we hear from the elders of things that happened when they were in residential schools, and I can't stop thinking about it as I read through the report. So staff, this will go a long way to helping work through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Lindsay, rezoning application number RA 425-6404 Metro Drive.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next item on Council's agenda, as you mentioned, is a rezoning application at the subject property. This is a site-specific request to ask to add cannabis retail store as a permitted use.
Moved, Councillor Armstrong. Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I was very distracted with
Sorry,
that.
we have to do it, yes, first reading.
Yes, sorry.
First reading.
Councillor Hemmons, if you
I'm
wouldn't
rushing.
mind. Yes.
Just ignore me. First reading done.
We need to read it.
Yes, you should be reading this.
Ms. Gurry, would you like me to start with the first one so we have the exact wording on record? Okay. So I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.150 to rezone 6404 Metro Drive to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the Woodgrove Urban Centers CC4 zone pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Motion opposed, motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.150 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
And I move that council direct staff to secure the amenity contribution and BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation branch approval prior to adoption of the bylaw should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is rezoning application number RA 430-350 Terminal Avenue. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This item is an additional rezoning application for a site-specific amendment to allow cannabis retail store on the subject property. And Your Worship, I should note that both with the previous application and this application, should council support it, the next step would be to proceed to the public hearing, which at this point is scheduled for July 4th.
Very good. And we have a delegation, Sergio Pawar. Am I pronouncing it correctly? And if I'm not, please correct me. I don't take offense very easily. Good evening.
I just actually wanted to just make myself available, and if you guys had any questions, I could let you know kind of what we're doing. We're not we're not a company that comes into different cities and different neighborhoods and looks for a lease and trying to set up a business there. We've actually purchased the whole building. We're planning a whole renovation of the whole building, about $250,000 on the exterior. We want to add another unit into the building as well, so we'll bring another business into the building. And just extra stuff like, I know the requirement for downtown cannabis stores doesn't require parking, but it's a very busy street. So when we was picking the property that we wanted to go with, we made sure we had on-site parking, which we do, 7 stalls. We'll have a private entrance from the back with a loading bay, and just extra things like that. But it was mainly just to say I'm available here if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Any questions to the delegation? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Himmons.
Thank you. I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2019, number 4500.152 to rezone 350 Terminal Avenue to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the Terminal Avenue DT4 zone pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019, number 4500.152 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
I'm just wondering, when I was looking at the report, did we not just approve another one that the recommendation was to deny on terminal? That I don't see on the report that actually got recommended?
Sorry, Your Worship, it's possible that our reports have not caught up to Council's most recent decision. The reports are drafted a couple weeks ahead of time. So you're correct. There are 2 other applications on Terminal, one of which I believe has gone to public hearing, and one which will, Council gave first and second reading to at your last meeting, and will also go to the public hearing on July 4th.
So my question is then, through you to staff, is 350 not within that 200 meter of the other one that was just gone through reading?
Your Worship, and we can clarify this, but my understanding is outside that 200 meters. But I would also note that the guidelines that were adopted by Council speak to 200 meter separations from stores, but that there may be some consideration given to those stores in the downtown core.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
I move that council direct staff to secure the amenity contribution and BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch approval prior to adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is development permit number 1114-4800 Cedar Ridge Place. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As noted in the agenda, this is a development permit, form and character development permit on the subject property to permit 170-unit residential development. I know that the applicant's agents are planning to speak to you this evening, so I won't go into great detail in the design of the project, but I would note that the property is split zoned, and I believe council has received some feedback from the community and concerns about the use specifically of the north part of the property, which is zoned for a lower density residential. And I want to just take a moment to explain staff's rationale for supporting what are basically 3-story apartment buildings. So if you've looked at the design, there are generally three buildings proposed for this site. 2 on the northern zone portion, buildings B and C, and building A on the central portion, which is designated for a higher density use. The site is, I don't know if council's had the opportunity to look at the property, but the site is challenging, a rocky site with significant slopes over the land. From staff's perspective, this idea of clustering the development on the flatter portions of the property was supportable. So as such, we're supporting variances that in our opinion would be more respectful to the topography and to the site and allow for greater retention of trees and existing natural areas on the property. Your Worship, certainly happy to answer any questions council may have.
Councillor Armstrong.
Question, and I don't know if Mr. Lindsay may answer it or maybe the delegation. Was there shading done of the site for surrounding properties?
Sorry, Your Worship, through Councillor Armstrong, is there a shadow study?
Yeah,
that-
sorry,
that-
shadow,
That's been done?
shading,
Sorry,
shadow.
sorry, I just didn't hear the question, sorry.
No, I did say
Wasn't trying
shading,
to
shadow.
question. I'm not aware if the architects have done one, but maybe we can ask them that when they come to
I'll
the
ask that
podium.
question of the delegation.
I'm sure my
Thank you.
staff are aware, but I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a number of delegations. The first is Scott Butler, President of High Street Ventures. If you could introduce yourself, be 5 minutes, and when the light turns orange, you have a minute left. Good evening.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you. My name is Scott Butler. I'm the president of High Street Ventures. Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. And first, I'd like to thank staff at the City of Nanaimo and our High Street employees, some of whom are here tonight, including some of our construction team and our architect, Bill, who will be up next. So I'll start by talking about, let's see, who is High Street? So High Street, actually, it's a good thing I have 5 minutes because Jeff tells me it normally takes me 2 hours to tell this story. I'll be quick. But I started High Street in 2005 with my wife and a great business partner who was a co-founder of WestJet. And our first development was actually in Courtenay on Vancouver Island. And we since expanded to throughout Alberta, BC, the Northwest Territories, and one in Ontario. The project in Nanaimo will be our 28th community. And over that time, we've built over 3,400 homes, the vast majority of which are rental apartments. Our company's goal is to own and operate 1,000 apartments that will be net zero. So net zero is to create as much energy as we use on site and also have them zero carbon. So that's a big goal for us to have that by the end of 2024. And I'd like to say we're well on our way. This project will actually meet or exceed Energy Step Code 3. In fact, we're targeting Step Code 4. I just don't want to commit to that today, but it's very likely we'll get there, which means we'll reach the Step Code 4 10 years ahead of the mandatory implementation. Our energy modeling puts our buildings averaging 38% in energy savings relative to the National Energy Code for buildings. And it's also designed to be 100% net zero carbon. I believe this all aligns well with, I believe City Council just declared a state of emergency on climate change at the end of April. So we're very proud to be helping lead the industry in that direction. There was a question about operations. People always, I shouldn't say always, but there's been some concern about having rental apartments in their community. I'd just like to point out, these are operated as institutional quality apartments. I mean, there's people on site. In fact, we own a mixed community in Calgary where we have condos and rentals, and we tend to have less problems with the renters than the owners. So just like to point that out, that these people are, in what we call the missing middle. It's the income range tends to be about $45,000 to $75,000, and it's about creating a housing option for those people. So they're very thoroughly vetted. In terms of design, I won't say much about it. There's some pictures here. Think of it as a mid-range condo. We believe we spend more money than most other developers on energy efficiency and soundproofing. And that's our two primary areas of focus in the design. And then, of course, we have quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances and all the rest of it. Back to energy efficiency. We'll build this to Built Green Platinum. Our first completely net zero building will be the community building, which will be on the site in Nanaimo. We have what might be the largest solar panel installation on Vancouver Island going on the site. So 288 kilowatts may not mean much to people, but a typical household installation might be 10 or 12. So it's a massive installation. We basically blanket the roof on every building with solar panels. Other things we do, LED lighting. Sorry?
1 minute.
You bet. LED lighting, triple pane windows, increased insulation. So our ceiling will be R58 and the walls are typically R28. We'll also have electric cars charging stations. condensing heat pump dryers, a car share program, and low-use water toilets and faucets. Basically, we spend a lot of money on that stuff. Finally, in terms of the contributions to the city, there is a parkland dedication. There's also a cash provided to build a dock on Long Lake, construction of a trail along the frontage, and widening of Salal Drive, which includes sidewalk and landscape boulevard. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, nicely timed. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. When visiting with some of the neighbors, there was some concerns about shadowing from Building B, I think. C. And can you describe to me, I know that you probably heard it at your open house, any plans you had to mitigate that or look at it?
Yeah, I better direct that to Bill. I'm unfortunately, although it started with me, I'm so far removed from an individual project at this stage that Bill will be better able to answer that. So sorry, I can talk about some of the other concerns, but that one I'm not familiar enough with.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
The next is Bill Fisher, the architect. Again, 5 minutes. Light goes on at 4. If you can introduce yourself for the record, thank you.
Your Worship, Councillors. Bill Fisher, I'm the architect for High Street Projects. Hold it now. Yeah, it's me. This has got to be one of the most interesting sites that I've done with High Street Ventures. There are 3 parts to the site, 2 R6s and 1 R8. The slide on the screen now, the top slide is the lower south R6, which is not being built on. It's just too steep to do that. The center slide is the center R8 zone, which has had a previous development started on it and is basically a lunar landscape right now. And the bottom slide is the top R6, which is at the top of the hill, which is a rocky, tree-covered, moss-covered, a beautiful site. The site is very nice. I'm going to skip forward to. So that's the site in plan. The top where the 2 buildings are is the R6, the center is the R8, and the bottom is off the slide, and that's basically being left as is. The site was a challenge. We tried many different options on this. Not on the center section. The R8 was always going to be an apartment building. It's set in the site to the south side of basically where the existing blast zone is. Its ground floor level is up to kind of the level of the top of the ridge at that point. So the new parkade is going to be basically at grade level right now, where ground is right now. The upper R6, we did try, I think there's about 16 to 20 different options we tried on that site. We looked at townhouses, we looked at all kinds of combinations, and the goal was to preserve as much of the natural landscape as possible. The townhouse options basically required much more road, much more parking, and basically destroyed a lot of the whole feeling of the upper part of the site. So in the end of the day, we chose, or High Street chose, to go with these 3-story apartment buildings, which put most of the parking underground in parkades. It also preserved most of the trees. They were sited on the site in the 2 flat areas that were there. There is still going to be blasting because it is mostly a rock site up there, but we've tried to keep that as minimal as possible, maintaining the center natural landscape that's there. Let me go back to that section. These are site sections through the site in many directions. The top one is, oh, I better look at that, I can't read it. Can't read it there either. The top one is Building B, which is the west building. You can see the relationship to the single-family houses to the north, and the center section where the cars are shown is basically the where the barn would be, and the lower steep part is where we're not building at all. The second section is a section through Building A, and you can see how it's sitting on the site at the ridge of where the existing grade is now. And the center part of the site on the left is left mostly treed and untouched. The third section down is a section through Buildings B and C. That shows the three-story, how we've tried to cut and blast as little as possible, preserving the center part of the site for trees and natural landscaping. I guess the bottom, the fourth row down in the left slide.
1 minute, Mr. Fisher.
Oh, geez. The fourth row down is the slide showing the relationship to the properties to the north and the Building B to the right is a street view. And the bottom slide is a view looking south, looking at the center part of the site, which is preserved, and Buildings C on the left and B on the right. So Building B is 48 units, 3 stories, and plus a parkade. Building C, which is on upper right, we did have a bigger building on that point. It was built up to the 3-meter setback line. After the community open house, we pulled the length of that building back to be just under 13 meters from 3 meters. So it's set back more. The upper buildings we designed to have townhouse feel with private entrances into the ground floor units from that side. So there's special treatment at the entrances, bigger
Mr.
roof
Fisher, you're
overhang.
going to have to wrap up.
Okay. We're asking for some height variances, mostly generated because the site is very difficult in terms of terrain to make it work. I mean, you could almost only do a 1-story building on this site. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
I think you actually answered my question, so
Oh.
yeah, we'll have a few
Yeah.
more probably. Regarding the shadowing of the property. And so you said to do that, you moved the building back, basically 10
Yeah.
meters.
The original application of Building C, the northeast corner touched the 3-meter setback line. And now it's set back 12.72 meters.
And did you reduce the roof at all in that edge, or is it still the same?
It's the same height,
Same height?
but pulling it back actually made the relaxation required for building height less, because the natural grade at that corner of the site comes up quite steeply there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have some questions regarding traffic, if I may. I understand that your exit to Salal Drive here is emergency exit?
It's an emergency exit only.
So traffic won't be going out there, which
Nope.
means all of the traffic will be heading out to Rutherford. Now, I'm not sure whose responsibility that is, but it's, from the way I look at it, when I walk the property, a number of cars are going to be coming out there probably at work time in the morning and coming home at night. Anybody who wants to get to the highway is going to have to turn left over 3 lanes of highway, basically, 2 going in, 1 the other way. And there's no light there. So I'm wondering, who would be responsible? I'm not sure who the question would be it's probably staff to mitigate that, or is that something you would be working with to do?
I'm pretty sure we did a traffic study. I don't know.
Yeah, I can answer, but I can't.
I'm sorry, but
Oh, am I allowed to answer? Is that-
Ms. Gurry.
Sorry.
Your worship, it would be up to council, so if council does have a question and the delegation can answer it, then you could invite them back up to the podium to ask.
I don't have the answer, but Scott probably does.
please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, we had a traffic study done. That's a requirement of the development, and the conclusion was there was no upgrades required for that service level for the intersection. The peak hour traffic generation was 45, the peak hour AM departure traffic was 45 cars in an hour. So I think about 1 car in over a minute. That was the peak AM traffic generation predicted. And given that level, there wasn't any recommendation for anything.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through the delegation. I just have a question about your solar panels. Will that information be available for the fire department? Because it does pose lots of logistics when fighting fires. There's a lot of issues with solar panels because they don't shut off. Is there going to be key available? All that type of issues from a safety perspective.
I believe it's set up to shut off when the fire alarm goes off.
We work with the local fire department. They come and inspect as we're doing the install. There's a process we go through, and each fire department may have a slightly different interpretation, but it's all done according to code and according to the setup that they'd like to see. So we've dealt with that before. We've done it a number of times.
Just through you, Chair, perhaps Chief Fry could comment if they do have that information on hand.
Your Worship, maybe I can try to answer, and Chief Fry can jump in. Certainly, when we get to the building permit portion of an application approval, the fire department reviews those plans, so they're aware of that, and they'll make comment that will be incorporated into the building permit. So in this case, that will form part of the permit and be reviewed by Chief Fry's staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the delegation? No, thank you very much. The next delegation, and forgive me, Ed Zouar. A familiar face, but a name worse than Krog. I mean that in a kindly way, of course.
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship.
Good evening.
My name is Ed Javior, and I'm a resident of Salel Drive, 4085 Salel Drive, and we're in very close proximity to the development that's indicated up on the screen right now. That's not my PowerPoint, but I make use of it. We're located one property over, as you can see at 4085. 4079 abuts the development property. The closest zoning is an R6 zone. What the developer is proposing to do is to build a multi-unit complex on R6 zone. As far as our knowledge, my knowledge personally, is that R6 zoning is for single-family homes or townhomes. It's structurally quite different from a multi-unit complex. There's a number of issues that associated with this is we're requesting a revision to their current development proposal to address the fact that the zoning is not adequate as it exists right now to accommodate a multi-unit complex. Building C in particular, which is the closest one, it butts 4079 Salel Drive. There's also a number of issues secondary to that. The underground parking that's proposed for Building C, there's going to be some blasting that occurs to accommodate for the underground parking. We, as people that are within a close proximity, if council does go ahead and approve this development, are very concerned about the associated damage that could occur during such blasting. I'm not sure of the number of underground parking stalls that are going to be necessary for Building C, but I think it would be accommodate the number of units, when I believe the number of units is around the 40 to 45 area units. So I would think that the underground parking would accommodate at least that many units. The builder that built our property, our home, 5 years ago, Winley Brothers, had a very difficult time blasting the rock out for the single-family homes that are already there. So the significance of blasting for that amount of underground parking space is a real concern to us about structural damage, structural damage, infrastructure damage, sewer, water, electricity, whatever else, but specifically the damage that could occur to a home, a resident that's already in existence there. The damage that could occur is pretty hard to prove. The developer could say they're going to have a pre and post inspection of each home. Sure, they go and they look around the perimeter, they go on the roof, they take a look around. Okay, we've made notations of certain defects or there's none. Construction takes place, damage occurs, foundation shifts, cracks because of the blasting. water drainage that wasn't sufficiently addressed during the construction period. The developer sends the same company, perhaps not even an arm's length company, to survey it, and they say, no, the damage was natural. So there's no guarantee of compliance or restitution to the people that live there during this blasting period. So that's a concern. I don't know how we would address something like that, but one of my neighbor over there, 4079 Salal, had a similar experience with a home that he owned, and he can maybe even expand on that when he comes up here. We're requesting that the city works with us, the residents and the developer, to address our concerns. Also, if the three-story complex building C is built in the R6 zone,
Less than 1 minute.
yeah, there's a shadowing effect. At the open house that they had at the Grand Hotel, they had a diagram, a very pretty one, indicating what the shadowing effect would be like. Again, one of my neighbors, Malcolm, at 4079 Salal, did his own studies and said their version was inaccurate. So the shadowing effect on our properties is very detrimental to the real estate values. The effect of extended shadowing would cause mold and mildew buildup, and it's a serious concern. Now, we are going to be...
Sir, you need to wrap
Oh,
up.
okay, well, that's about it. So basically, there's a negative effect on our properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation?
I do.
Councillor Armstrong.
You said that you had another shadowing study done. Who did that, and are
Well,
they qualified?
My neighbor at 4079 did his own personal shadow study, which was in conflict with the one that was presented at the open house. So what we asked the building department of Nanaimo, we sent them a letter concerning that, and we asked them to perhaps hire a third-party business, whatever contractor, and proceed with a third shadowing report that would mitigate either one and basically show whether there was a shadowing effect or not. According to my neighbor's shadowing study, we were experiencing a shadowing effect for about a 3-month period from January through to February.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it. The next delegation is Natalie Watt. Good evening. If you could introduce yourself for the record, and you know the drill. 4 minutes, the light changes.
Do I press this? Is this a timer?
That's for the slide.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good evening, worship and council. So my name's Natalie Watt, and yeah, we both live at 4085 Salal, so it's one property away from the developer. So basically, where's my page? Oh, hang on just a second, did I drop one on the way? Oh, okay, I'm missing one of mine. Just 1 second. There it is. Okay, I can do this. So, we're requesting that City Council not to accept the proposed development of Building C, DP 001114, and the developers build single-family homes or townhomes, as it is currently zoned for R6, or submit an application for the proper zoning to then go to public hearing and approval. Improper zoning for the proposed 4800 Cedar Ridge Place, DP 001114, development as currently is zoned for R6, single-family home or townhome for the proposed Building C, and is not compliant with the existing neighborhood community, and is in fact not structurally the same as the developers had been suggested to us during the open house, that it was structurally the same. We find a 70-unit or however many unit building rental complex definitely not structurally the same as a single home or townhome. Not to accept the requested height variance for Building C due to several winter months of increased shadowing to the neighboring properties and resulting damage to thus landscape and properties. 4079 Salal, 4085 Salal, and perhaps the townhomes behind as well. So, not to accept the underground parking proposed for Building C. The current R6 zoning is not structurally the same, and community concerns to structural damage and infrastructure damage to the neighboring properties caused by extensive blasting required to construct underground parking. Definitely not structurally the same as a single home or townhome doing such excessive blasting. The groundscape there is huge, all rock, so I can't even imagine the blasting that would be necessary for underground parking to the infrastructure and to the surrounding neighborhood. It is not a viable solution that the developers have suggested a home inspection for a pre- and post-inspection to the neighboring homes. Structural defects and damage to the envelope of residences could take place both immediately as well as over several years as a result of the extensive blasting and construction with no guarantee of restitution from the developer. The developer has made claims to consulting with the affected neighborhood residents, as we've read the submission from them to City Council. So that they've made claims to consulting with the affected neighborhood residents. This is untrue, as the only involvement that we are aware of was the one open house hosted by the developer at the Grand Hotel. The developer has shown a total lack of regard to the community and city by the unlicensed cutting down and removal of several old-growth trees that were homes to the natural habitat. This, to me, is not to be taken lightly whatsoever. We have not been informed of any fees that the developer has been given from the city or from City Council with regards to the unlicensing removal of these trees. The trees provided beauty to the neighboring properties, as well as 60-plus years old trees added ground stability that now no longer exists. This was submitted by myself and my husband with regards to our being delegates today, so I thought I should read that. The only other thing to add—
1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Is their original map and draw, everything was 10 feet. Now, 10 feet is for a single-family home or townhome between residences of their development and, say, 4079. 10 feet would be normal for what is currently zoned for, single-family home or townhome. We have no problem with them developing a single-family home or townhome. It would alleviate all our concerns that the community is having with trafficking, with, underground parking, with this height variance that is an extra 10 feet above a single-family home or townhome. 10 feet is no small matter. And the studies that we've seen have shown still, with the 40 feet that they're now proposing, it's still showing shadowing to our properties for at least 3 months in the winter.
You're going to need to.
Thank you
wrap up
very
soon.
much for hearing me today.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last delegation is Malcolm Threadgill. If you could introduce yourself in 5 minutes and light changes at 4.
Malcolm Threadgill. I live at 4079 Salal Drive, which is the property directly adjacent to the development in question. I've had the pleasure of meeting with 3 of the councillors at the site, and I've talked to another one on the phone. I've also met with 5 of the executives from High Street over different things. To start with, I'll just address the issue of the shadowing. I did a shadowing based on the plans that High Street provided and the government website, which shows the sun angles every month of the year. And when we went to the meeting at the Grand Hotel, we showed them to High Street, and they agreed that their shadowing study was wrong. That was with the development being 10 feet from our property line. Now they moved it back to 41 feet, The shadowing shows that our property, the one behind us, the one next to us, and the one behind them will get shadowing for about 4 to 4.5 months of the year during the winter. Okay. The other issue, one issue is I'd like to take issue with the city planning department. Two of these buildings are being zoned on R6, which according to city zoning is specifically to townhouse or townhouse form development. Nowhere have I found anything that describes this property as anything close to being a townhouse. It seems like the planning department changes the rules to suit the situation, which leaves very little protection for people that are buying property in the adjacent area. Like I bought my house 5 years ago, and when I approached the planning department, I was told that it was R6 and it would be townhouse at the maximum. All the neighbors on Salal, Amblewood, and Summit are concerned with blasting, and this has been brought up. I've had damage to a house where I was living next door to another house that was being built. And it is a major concern to everybody in the area, even people on Summit Drive, on Woodpecker Lane, which backs onto Salal Drive. And I've made the suggestion to High Street, but they haven't committed to it yet, that it would make a lot of people happier if they were to place a bond with the city to cover any damages to properties in the area because of blasting. Okay. Neighbors in Amblewood are concerned with their property being used as a shortcut. People from there will use Amblewood as a shortcut to get through to Rutherford and to the convenience store on the corner of Uplands and Rutherford. And they've requested that the developer put up a fence along the northeast section, and High Street have agreed to that. They said they would. But again, there's nothing in writing, and I don't know whether we can make it a condition of any permit. We've also addressed with High Street the possibility of putting in extra trees on that northeast section between Building C and our properties, basically. Because they've now got 40 feet to work with, and they basically said they will put in trees, bigger trees that will give some screening from the building. But again, nothing in writing. Okay. And then the other thing was again, it's been addressed already, but the traffic on Rutherford. I disagree with High Street that there's no problem. If you've ever driven that road in rush hour, you know it's going to be a problem. And that's basically it.
Thank you very much. Questions for the delegation? Councillor Bonner?
I actually had a question. I think I forgot it now. It was regarding when I talked to the developer, I asked questions about the side of the building that would be facing your development, and they told me there would be no windows on the side of both of those buildings.
Yes, they deleted the windows.
Yeah.
That was one of the things they gave up, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess this is a question. When you were working with them, were they, a developer and presenting your thing, were they quite open to suggestions for you?
Yeah. A lot of the suggestions they've agreed to. Moving back that building 30 feet was basically what we asked for to start with. In fact, I made the suggestion that they move it back by deleting 6 feet off the end of Building C and tacking them onto Building A, which I believe they've done, and actually they benefit because they lost 6 and gained 8. But yeah, they've been quite helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll move the motion to put it on the floor. Okay, sorry. I move that council issue development permit DP 1114 at 4800 Cedar Ridge Place with the following variants. Increase the maximum allowable building height for Building A from 14 meters to 15.5 meters. Increase the maximum allowable building height for Building B from 7 meters to 11.5 meters. Increase the maximum allowable building height for Building C from 7 meters to 10.35 meters. Reduce the front yard setback from Building A from 6 meters to 4.13 meters. Increase the height of a retaining wall within the front yard setback from 1.2 meters to 2.26 meters, and reduce the landscape screening requirements for the proposed refuse receptacles.
Do you have a seconder? Second. Seconded, Councillor Martman. Discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm very much struggling with this. I'm not struggling with A or B, but I am struggling with C. I do have issues. I would like to have more concrete information around the shadowing. Having been there, I do have concerns about that. My second concern is I do have a huge issue with the amount of traffic. Having tried to get out of that road numerous times and waited 15 to 20 minutes, I do believe it will be an issue. However, that's not my major concern. My major concern is the shadowing issue, and I don't know if there's a way we could have some information around that. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. A few questions for staff. The zoning that says we allow townhomes, but this is definitely an apartment complex. How do we reconcile that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Hemmons. So the descriptor of the zone definitely speaks to, it's referred to as the townhouse zone, I believe is in the title. Aside from the description of the zone, the project itself meets with the density provisions of the bylaw. And as I mentioned earlier, as the applicants are proposing to cluster the buildings on the site and minimize the impact on the property, staff felt the variance requests are supportable. So I certainly recognize that it doesn't meet with the title descriptor in the zone, but it meets with the low density nature that's anticipated in the zone itself.
Thank you. A couple follow-up, if I may. When a developer shows a shadow study that contradicts another shadow study completed by residents, how do we, or do we, figure out our own? How do we know which one is right?
We certainly have abilities internally to review shadow studies on plans. And sometimes the discrepancy in shadow studies can be based just simply on when, the time of year when the shadow study is projecting. Typically with applications, what you would see is they'd be spring or fall, approximating the equinox is generally when shadow studies are done. So I'm not surprised you may have a shadow study with an application, and then if somebody does it for the winter months, that it shows something different. I'm not sure that that's the explanation here, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the reason.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the blasting, I'm not convinced that the city would take a risk of blasting damaging our infrastructure, but I find it compelling that a homeowner would feel compromised by blasting. So are there any precedents or any opportunities for us to address that risk for homeowners?
Through Worship again to Councillor Hemmons. So what I would say is, first of all, blasting on sites throughout the city is not uncommon. Many of our sites that are left to develop are challenging, rocky properties, including the lands in and around this site had to have extensive blasting and rock chipping for those developments. So the way it works today is blasting is not regulated by the city, it's regulated by WorkSafe BC, and that the blaster carries their own insurance. So as part of that, they'll do as mentioned, I think one of the delegations was saying tonight, there'd be an audit done. They go out and do a review of the neighboring properties and infrastructure so that there was a baseline established and there was the ability to review post-blasting if there's any reports of damages, but it ultimately become a claim through the insurance provider.
Thank you. And one final, if I may, and that's the traffic study. That was completed by the city, the study that indicated that a light wouldn't be needed at Rutherford for this development?
Your Worship, in all cases, any traffic study associated with the development is typically done by the applicant's engineer and then evaluated or vetted by our own professional engineering staff, but the original reports would be done by the applicant.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I do have some of the same concerns I think fellow councillors share on this issue. The blasting, I can understand the concern of nearby residents, of course, but blasting is legislated and controlled provincially, and the reality is that in many of our sites, as Mr. Lindsay has indicated, blasting is required, and I'm certainly supportive of underground parking. The shadowing is another concern which I think deserves further consideration. Also the traffic going on to Rutherford with this size of development. My question to staff, maybe, and I don't want to put Mr. Lindsay on the spot, but maybe he can help me, because the R6 zoning, as Councillor Hemmons asked about, does seem confusing with reference to townhouses. So I understand Mr. Lindsay's explanation, and yet if I'm reading the report correctly, the proposed development achieves a density of 50 units per hectare, which is the bottom line of OCP density in this area. And if this size of development is achieving the bottom line of density, I don't understand how having townhouses there would be able to achieve that. So it doesn't seem to jibe, if you understand what I'm trying to say, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. And the townhomes in general are very difficult to build, especially if you think of the historical townhouse development in Nanaimo of a one-story townhome with a garage. It's very difficult to build those at more than 25 units per hectare. And then building into a site that has topographical constraints, it could even be lower than that. However, we've seen some more recent townhouse developments where the trend has moved away from one story to we actually see many three-story townhomes, stacked townhomes, and councils approved many of those applications recently I can think of. So the townhouse zone does allow for pitched roofs to have 9 meters, and that stacking does allow for a slightly higher density. But I agree, the townhome zoning on its own and the historical use of townhomes makes it difficult to hit that target established in the official community plan.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I'm still struggling to support this, but I'll listen to fellow councillors. Thank you.
Discussion. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Further to what Councillor Hemmons said, I really struggle with the fact when people come into our town and they're looking at our zoning before they buy, and it says R6, which is townhomes. And I think we all have a preconceived notion of what townhomes are, which is not an apartment building. So I really struggle with that. So if our caption in there is wrong, perhaps we need to change it, because I know for myself, I certainly wouldn't buy near an apartment building versus townhomes. There's a big difference. So I struggle with that. I do understand the issues that the developer is facing as well, so I also struggle with that. Like I said, my issue is not with building A, it's not with building B, it's with building C. And I too would like to have a traffic study, because having traveled that road daily, there's many, many issues with traffic there. There's many accidents on that corner, so I struggle with that. I also would like to have an independent assessment on shadowing, because I also think that's going to be a big issue. And especially if it's during the winter months when some people may suffer from seasonal affective disorder, not to have any sun during the winter, I think is very detrimental to health. So at this time, until that is done, I don't believe I can support this. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I too struggle with the townhome house concept, but as I've done my research on townhomes, they typically nowadays are 3 stories tall, which is the height of this apartment building. So if you pack them all together and painted them differently, they would look like an apartment building, except in this particular case, the residents are on 1 floor as opposed to on 3 floors. So I think that's where some people are coming from on this particular case. The fact that the building was moved back to 10 meters, if someone was to build a townhome only 3 meters from the lot line and it was 2+ stories tall, it would be shadowing his backyard for sure. but they're not. They're actually moved it back quite a bit. And I think between the two of them and the fact that they're putting a whole bunch of trees in there, in another 60 years, we'll be shadowing his property as well. So I think that to me, the developer has gone out of the way to make this thing work by moving the building back. I do have an issue with the traffic. I drive by there from my Rotary meetings every Wednesday morning, and traffic is backed up to where that street comes out. So if you wanted to turn left, but I think that's more of the city's problem as opposed to the developer's problem, particularly in this particular case. I think I'm going to be in support of this particular project, but I'd like to hear more from other councillors.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you. I am also in support of this project. I had a chance to visit the site and meet with a number of the neighbors. And the challenges that I heard from them were about proximity, and one was about shade, and the other piece of that was about privacy. I believe the developer moving the building back by 10 meters and ensuring that no windows are going to be on that side facing into the yards is the developer responsibly responding to the concerns of the residents. I hear the concern about the blasting as well, but hearing from Councillor Thorpe that that's provincially legislated and not something that we would get involved in, and that it happens often and is a typically safe practice, I feel comfortable with that. I am very concerned about the traffic on Rutherford Road. When we met with the neighbors, 3 of us arrived on bikes. Rutherford Road is a cycle route, and I can speak from a lot of experience. When people are looking to turn left into heavy traffic, they're not looking for bikes. So it's about density of the traffic now using that route, but also the safety of more vulnerable road users. However, I actually find this proposal really quite progressive. I find it, the solar panels, making the community building net zero emissions, I think this is the kind of responsible development that this council is really interested in. So I really hear the concerns of the residents. I hear that the developer is responding to them as best they can, and I think it's just one of those difficult decisions that I am landing on the side of the developers in this one. Thank you.
I obviously am always concerned when citizens come before council and express their concerns around any kind of development. And I think what I've heard tonight are not what I would call NIMBYs. The concerns raised by the residents tonight are reasonable. It's also patently obvious to me, however, that the developer has responded to a number of issues that arose earlier. I'm looking at the site, and I'm looking at the potential of what could be there. I'm looking at the amount of undeveloped or green space that's left around these 3 buildings. I have to consider that we have an acknowledged shortage of housing in this community. We have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that people do in fact have places to rent. I'm not swayed by the concept that we'd be better off with townhouses on this site. I think Councillor Bonner's remarks are very accurate and timely in terms of the impact, and I agree with Councillor Hemmons. This particular development encompasses a lot of the ideals that this town and this community and this council have expressed around carbon footprint, around utilizing solar power, all of those things. So with concerns, yes, around traffic, but that is the problem that we're going to have to face in every part of this community, as Nanaimo was recognized, given its proximity to the Lower Mainland, as a place to build and develop and grow and live and find employment or attend university, whatever the case may be. We're going to continue to grow, and I think it's our responsibility, amongst other things, to ensure that we have appropriate housing for people. And certainly, having lived in this community for 40 years steadily now, and having seen what happened when apartment development dropped off and rents over time increased substantially and availability, I'm not a perfect believer in the magic of the marketplace, but I do recognize that if these things aren't built, rents stay high, people can't move here, particularly those who can't afford to purchase right off the bat. So I will be voting to support this particular proposal. I think that it represents many of the things, as I say, that are important to this council. Any further discussion? Councillor Gesselbrock.
I hear the concerns of the neighbors of this, and the shadowing, having a large building built right beside your house and causing shade over the winter definitely is cause for concern. I can also understand the confusion over, as mentioned before, R8 and R6, R6 being the townhome. I think that if townhomes, from our previous understanding of what they would look like, covering that site would be much worse. And I think that it's this council's policy and within our OCP to densify around our urban nodes. And this development is doing that. It's an identified urban node in the Rutherford area. The development, I appreciate the attention to net zero and building efficient buildings. And I also see that there was some consideration of the developer on moving the building back by 10 meters. That's quite substantial, and that does make a big difference in the amount of shadowing that it would cause. And I think that going towards a more denser, smaller footprint townhome style is better. It creates a lot more green space. There's a lot more availability for trees. There's more permeable surfaces for water flow. And so this is the type of townhome that I would prefer to see as opposed to the older style. So notwithstanding the concerns around blasting, which I do believe that it is provincially regulated, and it's something that the city has come into contact with before, and the considerations are in place to make sure that people are protected. I'll be supporting this development. Thank you.
Any further discussion? We have the motion. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillors Thorpe and Armstrong. Motion carries. The next item is development permit number DP 1118-6010 Hammond Bay Road. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, a development permit, in this case, for 53 units on the subject property. There are two variances, and I just maybe take a moment because they're somewhat unusual variances, Your Worship. If I can ask that attachment I of the report be brought up. If Council, while we're pulling up attachment I, if you can refer to it, you can see that the subject property, in fact, is what we call a through lot, and that it fronts on both Hammond Bay Road and Claiborne. So by the default language under our zoning bylaw, it means it has two front yards. So 2 front yards for one property. The bylaw speaks to having a maximum front yard setbacks in many of our corridor zones, and the idea is that it encourages buildings to be moved forward to and embrace the street. And that in this specific zone, that maximum setback is 6 meters. Now, in this case, the applicants are requesting a greater setback from Hammond Bay Road and also a greater setback from Claiborne to facilitate the access and the on-site parking. Now, in the front, the setback from Hammond Bay Road, although the building is set back further than 6 meters, there are patios and semi-private spaces that are out there that do embrace the street, and overall staff do support the application. So I think we're one application ahead here. So, but Your Worship, unless there's any questions, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Question.
Councillor Armstrong.
Through you to staff, I do have a question again about a traffic study. Is that road cannot sustain any more traffic, in my humble opinion. We've had fatality accidents there with youth. I don't know how we're going to get that number of traffic onto that road. So has there been a traffic feasibility study?
So Your Worship, again, traffic studies are something we would typically do through rezoning of land in cases where developers come forward and they're developing under existing zoning. We're at this point evaluating the form and character of the building, the exterior finishes. So unless there's extreme situations, we do not generally review traffic studies as part of form and character DPs.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. A really quick question about the size of the units, Mr. Lindsay. On page 2, it says that the units range in size from 70.2 meters squared. That would make them just over 200 feet squared, if I...
That'd be about 700 square feet approximately.
700, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I thought maybe it was a typo.
Motion?
Yeah. Okay, so I move that...
Your worship, just quickly to
Right,
Councillor
Ms. Curry.
Hemmons, that you don't need to read the whole thing out for this one, just the bylaws, so.
Bylaws.
This is a development permit, so you don't have to read out the whole motion, you could just move the
Okay,
motion.
so that council issue development permit number DP 1118 at 6010 Hammond Bay Road.
Sure, that's great.
Seconded. Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Questions for staff? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Armstrong, motion carries. The next is development permit number DP 1122-4745 Ledgerwood Road. Mr. Lindsay.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. Another development permit for a multifamily building of 120 units on the subject property. There are variances associated with building 2 in this case for a height variance. There are also variances related to retaining walls. This is a rather steep property that drops off from Ledgerwood to the back of the property. Retaining walls are required. And there's also a provision to allow for a limited amount of parking in the front yard of the building. And if you look at the site plan, you'll see on the one end of the site, there's just a handful of stalls that extend out beyond the front face of the building, and as such, that requires a variance under our zoning bylaw.
Moved by Councillor Brown. Seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Now,
Next on to bylaws. It's zoning amendment bylaw number 2019, number 4500.138.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.138 to rezone 3923 Victoria Avenue to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the neighborhood center CC2 zone be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I move that local area service Morningside Drive establishing bylaw 2019 number 7281 to establish the Morningside Drive local area sewer and sanitary line service be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
I move that Morningside Drive local service area parcel tax bylaw 2019 number 7288 to provide the authority to impose a parcel tax on the Morningside Drive local service area be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. On the bylaw status information sheet, it's for information only, Ms. Gurry. We have no correspondence, no notices of motion, no other business. Question period? No questions?
no questions.
Well, a motion for adjournment, Councillor Bonner. Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.